Hey guys, tonight we are drifting back, not to grand battles or the reigns of forgotten kings, but to something far quieter, far more intimate. We are tracing the gentle history of the humble bookmark. You are not a conqueror tonight. You are a reader, settling into a favorite chair, the weight of a book a familiar comfort in your hands. The light is low, perhaps a single lamp throwing a warm pool onto the page, and the world outside has softened to a distant murmur. You crack the spine not too far. You're not a monster, and the scent of old paper and glue, that peculiar perfume of knowledge and story, rises to meet you. You begin to read, the words pulling you under their spell, but eventually, the weight of your eyelids becomes heavier than the weight of the narrative. You need to pause, to mark your place. Your hand reaches not for a dog ear, a practice that would make librarians of every era wince in sympathetic pain, but for a slip of paper, a ribbon, a tassel. This tiny, silent sentinel, this patient placeholder, is our subject. Its story is one of quiet dedication, a testament to our eternal desire to not lose our way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And wherever you are in the world, feel free to drop a comment down below, just your location and your local time. It's always fascinating to see just how wide and sleepy this community truly is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself not in a library, but in the scriptorium of a medieval monastery, somewhere in 10th century England. The air is cold and thick with the smell of burning tallow from the single candle, vellum, and the faint, metallic tang of ink. A monk, his back aching from hours of hunching, meticulously copies a biblical text. His book isn't a paperback with a glossy cover. It's a massive codex, a beast of bound parchment, its pages thick and stiff. He cannot simply bend the corner of a page worth a month's wages. He needs to pause his work, to go to prayers, or simply to rest his straining eyes. So, he reaches for the simplest of tools, a small, thin strip of parchment or leather, a leftover scrap from the bookmaking process itself. This is the ancestor, the primordial sliver of what would become our bookmark. It had no frills, no decoration. Its only job was utility, to silently say, I was here, I will return. This is the mainstream historical fact, the bedrock of our story. The earliest bookmarks were born from pure, unadulterated necessity in the scriptoriums and libraries of the ancient and medieval world. But of course, humanity is never content with mere utility for long. We must adorn, we must personalize, and so, we travel further back, to the great library of Alexandria. You walk its legendary halls, a ghost among the countless scrolls, the collected knowledge of the known world. Here, a scholar consults a lengthy papyrus scroll. Unrolling it fully is a cumbersome, dramatic affair. He needs to get back to a specific passage tomorrow. He doesn't want to reread the entire thing, so he takes a small piece of papyrus, a fragment, and attaches it to the edge of the rolled scroll with a dab of wax. A primitive post-it note, or perhaps, in a more luxurious setting, a thin cord of leather or a silk thread is tied around the scroll, a small, elegant tassel marking a general region. This is the quirky, fringe tidbit. The concept of a bookmark predates the book itself. They were used for scrolls first, a tiny but crucial tool for navigating the vast, unwieldy information streams of the ancient world. Imagine that even the greatest scholars of antiquity were just trying to find their place. And now, a question that has quietly plagued a very specific corner of academia. What, exactly, constitutes a bookmark? Historians still argue whether certain artifacts were deliberate placekeepers, or something else entirely. Take, for instance, the small, vellum tabs sometimes found in medieval psalters. Were they sewn in by the original binder to mark the different liturgical hours, making them a permanent part of the book's architecture? Or were they added later by an owner, a personalized navigation system? The line between a built-in bookmark and an added one is surprisingly blurry. It's a debate fought not with swords, but with footnotes. A quiet scholarly tiff over the intent behind a centimeter of centuries-old cowhide. It's the kind of wonderfully niche argument that reminds you that every object, no matter how simple, has a story layered with complexity and mystery. And as you sink deeper into your chair, the soft hum of the fan a steady rhythm behind this whispered history, you realize this isn't just a story about a piece of paper. It's a story about us, about our innate desire to leave a trace, a sign that says, however temporarily, I am here. The quiet scrape of the monk's quill continues, a soft, rhythmic sound against the vellum, a sound so faint it's almost absorbed by the chilly, stone-walled silence of the scriptorium. You are still there, a spectral observer, watching as the history of this simple tool begins to evolve from that basic strip of parchment. His work is not just transcription. It is devotion, an act of faith written in ink. And within this sacred task, the bookmark begins its first, tentative steps toward becoming something more than a placeholder. It becomes a guide, a signpost within the holy text itself. His hand, perhaps stiff from the cold or weary from the intricate work, doesn't always reach for a loose scrap. Instead, he might draw directly in the margin. Not a doodle of a bored student, though those exist in glorious abundance. A quirky truth we'll get to, but a deliberate mark, a small, carefully drawn hand, its index finger pointing squarely at a line of particular importance. This is a manicule, from the Latin manicula, meaning little hand. These pointing hands are everywhere in medieval manuscripts, the polite, pre-highlighter way of saying, hey, look at this part, this is important. They are the bookmark internalized, made a permanent part of the page, a direct line from the mind of the scribe to your own. But the human mind, even one devoted to divine contemplation, wanders. The mainstream historical fact here is the manicule's role as a formal, scholarly bookmark, a system of marginalia that was widely recognized and used across Europe. It was a practical tool for navigation, yet, if you let your gaze soften and wander from the precise lines of text, you start to see the margins come alive with a different, far more bizarre story. Here, nestled next to a solemn psalm, is a detailed drawing of a knight jousting with a snail. Over there, in the corner of a page of liturgical law, a rabbit is serving a hound a summons, a monkey plays the harp, a bishop fox preaches to a congregation of geese. This is the glorious, utterly bizarre world of medieval marginalia, and it is our quirky tidbit for the night. These doodles, these grotesques, are the subconscious of the Middle Ages spilled onto the page. Were they bookmarks? Not in the traditional sense, but they served a similar, albeit stranger, purpose. A particularly flamboyant monster biting its own tail might mark a frequently referenced passage, simply by being a memorable visual landmark. Oh, the bit near the dog playing chess, one monk might whisper to another. They are accidental placeholders, born from the restless energy of a hand and mind that needed a break from the solemnity of it all. And this, of course, leads to a wonderfully esoteric debate that keeps medievalists arguing late into the night over pints of ale. Historians still argue whether this riot of marginal art was purely whimsical, a form of mental stretching for the scribes, or if it carried deeper, coded meanings satirical, theological, or allegorical. Was the snail a symbol of the Lombards, notorious for their cowardice? Was the jousting knight a critique of the aristocracy, or was it just funny? Did a monk, his eyes crossing from copying the book of Leviticus for the 10th time, simply think, you know what this page needs? A snail with a helmet. The truth is probably a messy combination of all the above, a reminder that the people of the past were not just solemn figures in tapestries. They were people with a sense of the absurd, who needed to leave their mark, even if it was a tiny, inky elephant in the corner of a prayer book. This desire to leave a mark, to personalize the text, extends beyond drawings. You see it in the carefully written notes in the margins. The nota bene marks literally note well, another form of textual bookmark, a reader's personal annotation. A underline, a star. These are all claims staked on the landscape of the book. They are a conversation across time. That monk's manicule points to a line, and 800 years later, your eye is drawn to the same spot. His doodle of a bizarre fish makes you smirk in the 21st century. The bookmark, in all its forms, is the ultimate symbol of the reader's engagement. It says the book is not a static object, but a lived-in space. It is a reader's way of saying, I am here, in this sentence, and this sentence is now a part of me. The simple strip of parchment has grown into something with personality, with humor, and with a pointing finger that stretches across the centuries, guiding us to what someone once thought was important, strange, or just worth a laugh in the quiet of a stone-walled room. That pointing hand, the manicule, seems to hang in the air for a moment, a ghostly guide in the dim scriptorium, before the scene around you begins to shift and dissolve. The cold stone walls melt away, replaced by the opulent, wood-paneled warmth of a royal court. The scent of ink and vellum is overpowered by the rich aroma of beeswax candles, sandalwood, and the faint, floral perfume of wealth. The humble parchment scrap, the monk's practical tool, would feel terribly out of place here. In these halls, where books are not just repositories of knowledge, but spectacular displays of status and piety, the bookmark itself must evolve. It must become worthy of its gilded surroundings. And so, it does. The simple placeholder is about to get a serious upgrade, trading its rough spun practicality for the smooth, silent luxury of silk. You watch as a royal bookbinder, his hands skilled and steady, completes his masterpiece, a leather-bound Bible. Its cover embossed with gold leaf and secured with a delicate metal clasp. But his work is not quite finished. He takes a narrow, woven ribbon of the finest crimson silk and, with a few precise stitches, secures one end of it to the top of the spine's inner hinge. The other end, perhaps tipped with a tiny, elegant metal aglet to prevent fraying, hangs down between the pages, a slender, colorful promise of easy return. This is the birth of the register, or bookmark ribbon, and its invention marks the moment the bookmark transitions from a useful add-on to an integral part of the book as very architecture. The mainstream historical fact of this transformation is often tied to the grandiose publishing projects of the 16th century, particularly the production of large, lavishly printed Bibles meant for churches and the libraries of the nobility. These were not books to be carried around. They were monuments, often chained to their lecterns. The silk ribbon bookmark was the perfect accessory for such a tome. It was durable. It was clean, unlike a greasy piece of parchment that might transfer dirt. And it was undeniably, visibly luxurious. Its adoption was swift among the elite. There are records, for instance, of a specific order placed by the printer Christopher Plantin in the mid-1500s for a massive quantity of silk ribbon, explicitly for use in the bindings of his prestigious publications. We know that Queen Elizabeth I was an avid reader and a renowned patron of the arts. Her personal libraries would have been filled with such books, their silk ribbons perhaps in her favorite colors lying like sleeping snakes between the pages of works by Cicero, Plutarch, and the latest theatrical plays. The ribbon became a symbol of a refined, literate mind, a tiny flag of sophistication planted in the landscape of a text. But of course, where there is luxury, there is also eccentricity. The quirky tidbit from this era involves not just the ribbon itself, but its potential enhancements. Imagine a wealthy bibliophile in the 17th century, a man who believes reading should engage all the senses. He acquires a new folio, a grand book of maps of the New World. It has a lovely white, silk bookmark, but white is so plain. So, he instructs a servant to take the ribbon and have it lightly perfumed with a drop of rose oil or ambergris. Now, every time he opens his book to chart a course to the Caribbean, the scent of roses wafts up, creating a sensory association between the text and the fragrance. There are even accounts, more anecdotal than proven, of nobles using ribbons dipped in diluted animal musk or civet, creating a much more assertive reading experience. The idea was that a memorable scent could help create a memory of the place and the text, a theory that modern science actually supports. So, that scented ribbon wasn't just decadent, it was an early, and rather aromatic, experiment in cognitive bookmarking. This practice, however, leads us directly to a quiet, but persistent scholarly squabble. Historians still argue whether the woven silk bookmark ribbon was a European invention that spread outward or if the concept was influenced by trade goods and practices from the East, particularly from China and the Middle East, where sophisticated silk weaving and the use of textiles in daily life were far more advanced. Did a European bookbinder see a silk cord used in a ceremonial scroll from the Orient and have a eureka moment? Or was it a truly independent innovation, born from the combination of new wealth and the increasing availability of fine fabrics? The evidence is threadbare, no pun intended. It's a debate woven from trade route maps, customs ledgers, and the silent testimony of a few fragile ribbons themselves, their origins now faded and lost to time. It is a reminder that even the most straightforward object can be a knot tied between different cultures, its beginnings pulled tight and hidden from view. And as you imagine that faint scent of rose oil on a centuries-old ribbon, you realize the bookmark is no longer just a tool. It's becoming an experience, a tiny, almost invisible thread connecting the reader's world to the world within the pages. That single, perfumed silk ribbon, a luxury for one, begins to multiply before your eyes. The opulent court fades, its gold leaf dimming into the soft, gas-like glow of a Victorian parlor. The air is different here, thicker, heavier. It smells of coal smoke, beeswax polish, dried flowers, and the distinct, cloying sweetness of morning. The book, once a symbol of divine knowledge or aristocratic status, has now become the heart of the middle-class home, a tool of moral improvement, and a refuge from the industrial world outside. And the bookmark, in turn, undergoes another profound transformation. It is no longer a simple register sewn into a spine. It is now a detachable, highly personal object of art, an expression of identity, affection, and, quite often, grief. You watch as a young woman, her dress the stark black of full mourning, sits by the fireplace. In her lap is not a book, but a small tray of supplies, brightly colored glass beads, fine silk thread, and a slender needle. Her fingers move with a practiced, almost meditative rhythm, weaving the beads into an intricate, delicate pattern. She is not making jewelry, she is crafting a bookmark. This is the era of the Victorian beaded bookmark, a phenomenon that swept through Europe and America, turning the humble placeholder into a canvas for personal sentiment and staggering craftsmanship. The mainstream historical fact of this era is the sheer, explosive popularity of these handmade beaded bookmarks. They were a perfect storm of Victorian ideals, the cult of domesticity, which encouraged women to pursue refined handicrafts at home, the rise of pre-printed patterns that could be followed like recipes, and the availability of cheap mass-produced glass beads from Bohemia and Venice. Magazines like Godey's Lady's Book published countless patterns, from simple geometric designs to shockingly complex pictorial scenes of flowers, birds, and patriotic flags. They were a sanctioned outlet for creativity and a socially acceptable gift. Giving a handmade, beaded bookmark was a gesture of deep affection, a token of friendship, a love gift, or a solemn memento. They were the text messages of their day, a way to say I am thinking of you, in a language of colored glass and silk. Every parlor had its jar of them, spilling out in a colorful cascade next to the family Bible and the latest serialized novel by Mr. Dickens. But as with all things Victorian, where there is sentiment, there is also a deeply strange and morbid underside. The quirky tidbit here, the one that might make you shift slightly in your chair, involves the most personal of materials, human hair. Hairwork was a colossal trend in the 19th century. It was durable, personal, and carried the literal essence of the beloved or the departed. Women would weave bookmarks not just from beads and thread, but from the hair of their children, their sweethearts, or their deceased relatives. There were even instructions for creating mourning mosaics, where hair from multiple deceased family members could be woven together into a single, somber band. Imagine opening a book and finding a placeholder made from your late grandmother's braid. It's a concept that sits at the unsettling intersection of devotion and macabre. These hair bookmarks were the ultimate memento mori, a constant, gentle reminder of mortality nestled between the pages of a comforting novel. They were meant to be a tender reminder, but to our modern sensibilities, they feel like something straight out of a Gothic tale. This practice, however, leads to a rather delicate debate among social historians. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with mourning crafts, like hairwork bookmarks, was a genuine, profound expression of grief, a culturally mandated performance of sadness, or a bit of both. Was the woman weaving her husband's hair into a pattern truly consoled by the act, or was she simply following the strict, complex, and very public rules of Victorian bereavement? The production of these items was so widespread and so commercialized, you could even send a lock of hair away to a specialist to be made into a bookmark, that it begs the question of authenticity. Was it a heartfelt ritual or a societal pressure to perform one's sorrow correctly? It's an argument that cuts to the very heart of how we understand historical emotions. The bookmark, in this light, becomes more than an object. It becomes a historical document of loss, a fragile, handcrafted tear frozen in time. And as you watch the firelight catch the glass beads in the woman's lap, each one reflecting the flame like a tiny captured star, you see the duality of the age, a surface of bright industrious beauty, masking a deep resonant undercurrent of melancholy, all hanging by a thread from the pages of a book. The soft, melancholic click-click of glass beads gives way to a new sound, a sound that begins as a low rumble and grows into a deafening, rhythmic cacophony. The cozy Victorian parlor is violently washed away, replaced by the immense, greasy, and deafening interior of a 19th century industrial printing press room. The air, once scented with hair and beeswax, is now thick with the sharp, chemical smell of printer's ink, the dusty odor of cheap wood pulp paper, and the sweat of the men operating these clattering, steam-driven behemoths. The bookmark, so recently an object of personal grief and handmade devotion, is about to be snatched up by the relentless tide of commerce. It is to be democratized, mass-produced, and turned into a tool for something entirely new, advertising. You stand in this noisy chaos, watching as a newly printed sheet, covered in rows of identical bookmarks, flies off the end of a press. They are no longer unique, no longer made with love. They are a product, and their primary purpose is no longer to mark a page, but to mark a mind. The humble placeholder is becoming a tiny, Paper salesman. The mainstream historical fact of this era is the revolutionary impact of chromolithography. This printing technology, which allowed for the cheap mass production of brightly colored images, was the rocket fuel for the advertising industry. And the bookmark was a perfect vehicle. It was useful, it was kept, and it lived in a place of quiet contemplation, the perfect audience, captive and receptive. Tobacco companies were among the first and most prolific innovators. A man would buy a pack of cigarettes and find inside, nestled next to the tobacco, a thin, beautifully illustrated bookmark. It might feature a famous actress, a sporting hero, or a patriotic emblem. The idea was simple and brilliant. Every time he opened his book, he'd see the brand name Bull Durham or Sweet Caporal. It was subliminal advertising before the term even existed. Soon, everyone was doing it. Tea companies, soap manufacturers, department stores, all of them began churning out these free, functional advertisements. The bookmark had been stripped of its sentimentality and reborn as a miniature billboard, a tiny testament to the power of capitalism to co-opt even the simplest of pleasures. But as always, the quirky underbelly of history reveals itself. For every beautiful Art Nouveau bookmark advertising Pear's soap, there were a dozen that were just bizarre. The quirky tidbit here is the sheer, often baffling, range of products that decided a bookmark was the best way to reach the public. There were bookmarks for livestock, dewormer, featuring cheerful pictures of robust cows. There were bookmarks for funeral homes, somber black cards with gold lettering that you were supposed to use while reading your favorite novel. Imagine being deep in a thrilling chapter of Dracula and your eyes drifting to the placeholder that gently reminds you of Greenwood funeral parlors. Dignified service at a fair price. There were even bookmarks for patent medicines, those infamous cure-alls laced with cocaine and opium. Their claims were printed right on the placeholder. Dr. Fowler's extract of wild strawberry cures nervous debility, brain exhaustion, and all forms of wasting diseases. It was a strange, almost dystopian fusion of the literary and the commercial. A snake oil salesman politely holding your place in a book. This rampant commercialization inevitably sparks a debate among cultural historians. Historians still argue whether these mass-produced ad bookmarks represent a cynical corruption of a pure object or a fascinating democratization of art and design. On one hand, they were crass commercial tools, the equivalent of junk mail inserted into your personal reading space. On the other, they provided millions of people who could never afford a handmade beaded or silk bookmark with access to beautiful, colorful, and often artistically significant printed art. The talented commercial artists of the day poured their skills into these tiny canvases, creating miniature masterpieces of graphic design that are now highly collectible. Were they a blight or a blessing? Were people annoyed by the intrusion, or did they delight in the free, colorful novelty? It's a debate that mirrors our own modern relationship with advertising. Do we hate the targeted ads, or do we sometimes appreciate the clever ones? The Victorian reader placing their patent medicine bookmark into a Charles Dickens novel was grappling with the same tension we feel today, a tiny paper symbol of the eternal push and pull between commerce and culture, between the thing we want and the thing we're sold. The thunderous, inky clamor of the printing press room slowly fades, not into silence, but into a new, more precise sound, the crisp, efficient click-clack of machinery stamping and molding. The smell of cheap paper and printer's ink is replaced by a sharper, chemical aroma, something alien and modern. It's the smell of camphor and phenol, the scent of invention itself. You've stepped out of the 19th century and into the bright, optimistic, and relentlessly forward-looking dawn of the 20th. The world is embracing the new, the synthetic, the modern, and the humble bookmark, that faithful paper servant, is about to be reinvented once more, not with ink, but with chemistry. It is to be liberated from its flimsy paper existence and reborn in the bold, unbreakable, and often garishly colorful world of early plastics. You are now in an age of bakelite, celluloid, and vulcanite, and the bookmark is getting a radical and dangerously flammable makeover. The mainstream historical fact of this era is the invention and application of celluloid, the first synthetic plastic, as a material for bookmarks, patented in the 1870s. Celluloid was a revelation. It could be molded, dyed in vibrant, previously impossible colors, and made to imitate more expensive materials like ivory, tortoiseshell, and mother of pearl. For the first time, you could have a bookmark that was rigid, durable, and practically indestructible compared to paper. Companies leapt on this. These new plastic bookmarks were often long, thin, and dagger-like, perfect for slipping between pages. They were emblazoned with Art Deco designs, images of flappers, and optimistic slogans about the future. They were the perfect accessory for the modern reader, sleek, clean, and undeniably new. They represented a break from the past, from the dusty, sentimental Victorians and their morbid hair mementos. This was the future, and it was bright, shiny, and smelled faintly of camphor. But this new wonder material had a dark, and frankly hilarious, quirk. The quirky tidbit here is that celluloid was made from nitrocellulose, also known as gun cotton. Yes, you read that correctly. Your great-grandmother's beautiful, iridescent bookmark was a first cousin to modern smokeless gunpowder. It was highly flammable. Under the right conditions, say, left too close to a reading lamp or a parlor fireplace, a celluloid bookmark could quite literally combust, curling and igniting with a sudden whomp. There are apocryphal tales of entire books being lost to a suddenly fiery placeholder. It was an age of incredible innovation, but also an age of hilariously overlooked safety hazards. The bookmark, an object of quiet contemplation, now carried within it the latent, explosive potential of a prop from a Buster Keaton film. It is a wonderfully absurd paradox. An object designed to preserve your place in a peaceful activity was, on a chemical level, a tiny, dormant stick of dynamite. This inherent duality of early plastics, their beautiful utility versus their dangerous and imitative nature, fuels a niche but fascinating debate among design historians. Historians still argue whether the early plastic era, for all its innovation, was ultimately one of cheap imitation rather than true design evolution. Was a celluloid bookmark that perfectly mimicked tortoiseshell a clever, affordable alternative? Or was it a tacky, fraudulent knockoff? Did the ability to mass-produce these items in gaudy colors actually degrade public taste, creating a world of kitsch? Or was it a bold and necessary step into a new material world, one that would eventually give us everything from telephones to spacecraft? The debate hinges on whether you see that garish orange bakelite bookmark as a beautiful piece of jazz-age design or as a pale, chemical imitation of something more authentic. It's an argument about the soul of objects, and whether a material born entirely in a lab can ever have the warmth and history of one born in the earth or crafted by hand. The bookmark, in its small, silent way, found itself on the front lines of this very modern conflict. That faint, camphoraceous scent of early plastic begins to mellow, blending with the richer, more comforting aromas of leather, paper, and, strangely, the faintest hint of chocolate. The stark, chemical brightness of the jazz age softens into the warm, amber glow of a well-lit library or a cozy bookstore in the 1920s or 30s. The world, or at least a certain privileged part of it, has entered a brief, golden age of reading. Public libraries are flourishing, literacy rates are climbing, and the publishing industry is booming with affordable editions of the world's greatest literature. And the bookmark, in all its forms, is experiencing its own glorious renaissance. This is its heyday, its moment in the sun. It is no longer just a tool or an advertisement. It is a collectible art object, a fashionable accessory, and a ubiquitous part of the reading experience. You are in the era where the humble placeholder truly comes into its own, celebrated and mass-produced in ways never seen before or since. The mainstream historical fact of this period is the sheer, staggering variety and volume of bookmarks produced. Every possible material and style was in play. The beautiful, full-color advertising bookmarks from companies like Coca-Cola and Kodak reached their artistic peak, often featuring gorgeous Art Deco designs and famous illustrators like Norman Rockwell. Alongside them, the rigid celluloid and early bakelite bookmarks continued to be wildly popular. Their bright, durable forms a symbol of modernity. But there was also a massive resurgence of more traditional materials. Woven silk bookmarks, now machine-made and affordable, were everywhere, often featuring inspirational quotes or images of famous authors. Even the Victorian craft of beading saw a revival, though often in simpler, more commercial forms. You could buy bookmarks made of leather, thin strips of wood, even early forms of laminated paper. They were given away as freebies, sold in stationery shops, and collected in albums. For the first time, the bookmark was a legitimate, recognized collectible, with enthusiasts trading and cataloging them with the same fervor as stamps or coins. But of course, this being the interwar period, even this golden age has its wonderfully odd corners. The quirky tidbit for this era involves one of the most bizarre and delightful promotional campaigns ever conceived: the chocolate bookmark. Yes, you heard correctly. In the 1930s, several confectionery companies, primarily in the UK, hit upon the idea of making bookmarks out of thin, flat bars of chocolate, wrapped in printed paper that extolled the virtues of both the candy and reading. The instructions were simple. You were to use the chocolate bar as your bookmark, and once you finished your chapter, you were to eat your placeholder as a reward. It was a diabolically clever, if slightly messy, bit of marketing. One can only imagine the number of books that ended up with faint, sweet-smelling smudges of cocoa butter on their pages, or the tragedy of a forgotten chocolate bookmark melting on a sunny windowside table. It was a perfectly bizarre, utterly optimistic product that could only have been born in an age that believed even reading could be improved with a little sugar. This explosion of variety and the rise of bookmark collecting inevitably leads to a debate that is still quietly argued over by ephemera historians and bibliophiles. Historians still argue whether this golden age represented the peak of the bookmark's cultural relevance or the beginning of its commodification and decline into kitsch. Was this era a celebration of the object, where it was finally given the artistic and collectible respect it deserved? Or was it the moment the bookmark jumped the shark, so to speak, becoming so common, so commercial, and so occasionally ridiculous like the chocolate bar that it began to lose its inherent dignity and purpose? Did the sheer number of cheap, mass-produced bookmarks devalue the entire concept, making it less a personal treasure and more a piece of disposable clutter? It's a debate about value, art, and purpose. Was a beautiful Art Deco metal bookmark from this era a worthy piece of design history? Or was it just another trinket in a jar on a dime store counter? The answer, like the object itself, is layered, depending entirely on whether you see the golden age as gilded or merely painted. The warm, sugary scent of that chocolate bookmark curdles and vanishes, replaced by a far more austere and sobering aroma. The smell of ration books, of course, gritty government tissue paper, and the faint, ever-present odor of fear. The golden glow of the interwar library is abruptly extinguished, the lights dimmed to a faint blue by mandatory blackout curtains. You have been thrust into the global cataclysm of the Second World War, and here, in this new reality of scarcity and total war, the bookmark undergoes its most pragmatic and unadorned transformation. This is not an era of adornment or collection. It is an era of survival, of making do. The bookmark, like everything else, is stripped down to its bare essentials, its purpose refined to a single, stark point: function over form. The colorful plastics, the woven silks, the mass-produced advertisements, they all recede into memory, rendered frivolous and impossible by the grim demands of a world at war. The mainstream historical fact of this period is the profound impact of rationing and material shortages on every aspect of daily life, including the publishing industry. Paper was a critical war resource, needed for everything from maps and propaganda to packaging for munitions. Its allocation was severely restricted. Books were printed on the cheapest, thinnest possible paper with narrow margins to save every inch. The idea of a company spending precious paper or plastic on a free promotional bookmark became unthinkable, a grotesque waste. This austerity trickled down to the reader. The beautiful bookmarks of the previous decade were now carefully preserved relics, too precious to risk losing. In their place, people used what was at hand: a train ticket, a ration coupon, a scrap of brown wrapping paper from a parcel, a torn piece of a newspaper. These became the most common placeholders. The bookmark was democratized in the most brutal way possible. It was whatever you had. But human ingenuity, especially under constraint, often produces the most curious artifacts. The quirky tidbit from the warriors involves the most personal of documents being repurposed for this simple task. Soldiers, hunkered down in muddy trenches or aboard troop ships, were voracious readers. Books were a vital escape from the unbearable tension and boredom, and they used what they had to mark their pages. It was not uncommon for a soldier to use a cherished photograph of a loved one back home, or the letter that photograph arrived in, as a bookmark. Even more poignant, and perhaps a little dark, were the bookmarks made from the foil liners of cigarette packs, or the paper sleeves from K-ration crackers. There's something deeply moving about the image of a young man reading a dog-eared copy of Hemingway by flashlight, using the wrapper from his meal as a placeholder. It's a quiet act of normalcy in the midst of chaos. The quirkiest and most morbid of all might be the apocryphal tales of soldiers using a single expended bullet cartridge. It's brass, cool, and heavy to hold their place, a placeholder. That was also a stark reminder of the very reality they were trying to escape. This widespread shift to purely functional, often ephemeral bookmarks sparks a subtle but interesting debate among cultural historians of the period. Historians still argue whether this wartime pragmatism represented a loss of the bookmark's cultural status or a purification of its very essence. On one hand, the object was undeniably degraded. It was no longer a thing of beauty or value, but trash repurposed. It had become utterly disposable. On the other hand, one could argue that by being reduced to a simple scrap of paper, the bookmark finally achieved its purest form. It was no longer about advertising, collecting, or showing off. It was solely about the intimate, personal relationship between a reader and their book, a relationship so important that even a scrap of a ration book was deemed worthy of facilitating it. Was it a fall from grace, or a return to its monastic, utilitarian roots? The answer likely depends on whether you see value in ornamentation, or find a deeper beauty in stark necessity. The wartime bookmark, a silent, fragile witness to history, doesn't provide an answer. It simply was. The acrid scent of gunpowder and coarse ration paper slowly dissipates, washed away by a new, potent aroma. The smell of fresh ink, cheap glue, and the slightly sweet, woody scent of mass-produced pulp paper. The grim austerity of the warriors is over, replaced by a booming, optimistic consumer society hungry for new things, accessible things. The world is reading again, but it is reading differently. You are in the post-war era, and a revolution is taking place not in a factory or on a battlefield, but in the hands of everyday people. It is the paperback revolution, and it is about to change the relationship between readers, books, and the humble bookmark forever. The hefty, expensive hardcover, once the dominant form, is being challenged by its lightweight, affordable, and disposable cousin, and as the book itself changes, so too must the object designed to reside within it. The placeholder is entering an age of casual convenience. The mainstream historical fact of this transformation is the massive, unprecedented proliferation of the mass-market paperback following World War II. Companies like Penguin, Bantam, and Ace Books flooded the market with cheap, portable editions of everything from classic literature to pulp detective novels. These books were not meant for a permanent place on a mahogany bookshelf. They were meant to be read on buses, stuffed into pockets, taken to the beach, and passed between friends. They cost a quarter. This fundamental shift in the physicality and philosophy of the book had a direct impact on the bookmark. A beautiful, rigid bakelite marker felt absurdly heavy and formal in a flimsy 50-cent paperback. A delicate silk ribbon was sewn into a hardcover spine for permanence. A paperback spine was just glue and paper, destined to crack. The bookmark needed to become as lightweight, casual, and disposable as the book itself. This new, casual relationship gave rise to the era's most delightful and quirky tidbit, the truly impromptu bookmark. With books now being cheap, ubiquitous, and treated with less reverence, people began using whatever was literally at their fingertips in the moment they needed to pause. The classic move was to simply close the book on a ballpoint pen, but the range of objects pressed into service is a fascinating snapshot of mid-century life. A common one was a cardboard punch-out from a TV dinner tray, a little brown tab that once held a compartment of apple cobbler, now holding a place in a Mickey Spellin novel, a bobby pin snatched from the hair, a matchbook from a diner, a playing card, often the Joker, a toothpick. There are even apocryphal, wonderfully absurd stories of people using a strip of bacon, though one hopes it was very well cooked and blotted, or a single dollar bill, perhaps as a not-so-subtle reminder to themselves of the value of their reading time. The bookmark had become an almost thoughtless, momentary decision, a far cry from the woven devotion of a silk ribbon or the careful craft of a beaded Victorian token. This widespread shift in behavior inevitably leads to a simmering debate among literary historians and sociologists. Historians still argue whether the paperback revolution, for all its democratic virtues, ultimately degraded the culture of reading by making books seem disposable, and by extension, devalued the ritual and respect that surrounded them. Did the use of a greasy diner napkin as a bookmark represent a welcome end to literary snobbery, a sign that books were now for everyone, everywhere, to be treated as familiar friends rather than sacred relics? Or did it mark a decline, a loss of the specialness of the reading experience, turning something that was once an event into mere background noise? Was the casual, often lost, bookmark a symbol of freedom or of carelessness? It is a debate that cuts to the heart of our relationship with literature itself. Is a book's value in its physical permanence, or in the transient joy and knowledge it provides, regardless of its form? The paperback, and the makeshift bookmark within it, sits squarely at the center of this question, a flimsy, printed thing that somehow carried the weight of the entire literary world on its spine. the crisp utilitarian smell of a new paperback, and the greasy scent of a forgotten diner napkin begin to warp and swirl, melting into new strange aromas, the earthy scent of patchouli oil, the acrid tang of incense, and the sweet skunky fragrance of, well, let's just call it a particular kind of tobacco. The clean-cut, suburban world of the 1950s is fracturing, giving way to the vibrant, chaotic, and defiantly weird counterculture of the 1960s and 70s. This is an era that rejects all things mass-produced, plastic, and conformist. It is a time of DIY ethos, of getting back to the land, of making things by hand as a political and personal statement. And the bookmark, that tiny slip of a thing, is swept up in this cultural tsunami. It is about to get funky, psychedelic, and deeply, deeply macrame. You are entering the age of kitsch and craft, where the placeholder becomes a symbol of peace, love, and very, very busy hands. The mainstream historical fact of this era is the massive resurgence of handmade crafts, a direct reaction against the sterile consumerism of the previous decade. The bookmark became a perfect, small-scale canvas for this movement. Women's magazines that once featured patterns for beaded bookmarks now featured instructions for macrame one's intricate knots of hemp or jute twine, often ending in long, cascading fringe and adorned with wooden beads or feathers. These weren't just bookmarks. They were wearable art, often doubling as necklaces or bag charms. At the same time, the psychedelic art movement embraced the bookmark, producing wildly colorful printed pieces featuring trippy, mind-bending patterns, peace signs, and portraits of counterculture icons like Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin. The bookmark became a way to quietly declare your allegiance to a new, freaky way of life, right there between the pages of your copy of Tolkien or Hermann Hesse. But of course, the 1970s had a unique talent for taking a good idea and making it utterly, fantastically bizarre. The quirky tidbit for this era is, without a doubt, the mood ring bookmark, capitalizing on the massive fad of mood rings, those jewelry pieces with thermochromic liquid crystals that changed color with body temperature. Some enterprising manufacturer had the brilliant idea of embedding the same technology into a plastic bookmark. The idea was that as you read a particularly thrilling or calming passage, your emotional state would change your body temperature, which would change the color of your bookmark, thus providing a live emotional commentary on your reading material. It was a perfect storm of pseudoscience and kitsch. One can only imagine the confusion of a reader engrossed in a horror novel, watching their bookmark turn a concerned black or a nervous amber. It was technology, however flimsy, attempting to interact with the ancient act of reading, and it was gloriously, hilariously misguided. This embrace of the handmade and the outright kitschy inevitably leads to a scholarly debate that is still relevant today, especially in our era of Etsy and artisanal everything. Historians still argue whether the DIY craft movement of the 60s and 70s represented an authentic return to pre-industrial values and a rejection of capitalist norms, or if it was merely a different, more homespun form of consumerism. Was the woman knotting a macrame bookmark engaging in a genuine act of anti-establishment creation, or was she just following the latest trend, buying patterns and materials from the very commercial systems she claimed to reject? Was the mood ring bookmark a silly fad, or was it a genuine, if flawed, attempt to merge technology with the humanities? The argument hinges on intent and authenticity. Was it a revolution, or was it just a new way to sell things? The bookmark, in all its knotted, feathered, and color-changing glory, sits at the center of this question, a tiny, tangled artifact of a generation that desperately wanted to make everything, including how they marked their page, mean something more. The crisp utilitarian smell of a new paperback and the greasy scent of a forgotten diner napkin begin to warp and swirl, melting into new strange aromas, the earthy scent of patchouli oil, the acrid tang of incense, and the sweet skunky fragrance of, well, let's just call it a particular kind of tobacco. The clean-cut, suburban world of the 1950s is fracturing, giving way to the vibrant, chaotic, and defiantly weird counterculture of the 1960s and 70s. This is an era that rejects all things mass-produced, plastic, and conformist. It is a time of DIY ethos, of getting back to the land, of making things by hand as a political and personal statement. And the bookmark, that tiny slip of a thing, is swept up in this cultural tsunami. It is about to get funky, psychedelic, and deeply, deeply macrame. You are entering the age of kitsch and craft, where the placeholder becomes a symbol of peace, love, and very, very busy hands. The mainstream historical fact of this era is the massive resurgence of handmade crafts, a direct reaction against the sterile consumerism of the previous decade. The bookmark became a perfect, small-scale canvas for this movement. Women's magazines that once featured patterns for beaded bookmarks now featured instructions for macrame one's intricate knots of hemp or jute twine, often ending in long, cascading fringe and adorned with wooden beads or feathers. These weren't just bookmarks. They were wearable art, often doubling as necklaces or bag charms. At the same time, the psychedelic art movement embraced the bookmark, producing wildly colorful printed pieces featuring trippy, mind-bending patterns, peace signs, and portraits of counterculture icons like Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin. The bookmark became a way to quietly declare your allegiance to a new, freaky way of life, right there between the pages of your copy of Tolkien or Hermann Hesse. But of course, the 1970s had a unique talent for taking a good idea and making it utterly, fantastically bizarre. The quirky tidbit for this era is, without a doubt, the mood ring bookmark. Capitalizing on the massive fad of mood rings, those jewelry pieces with thermochromic liquid crystals that changed color with body temperature, some enterprising manufacturer had the brilliant idea of embedding the same technology into a plastic bookmark. The idea was that as you read a particularly thrilling or calming passage, your emotional state would change your body temperature, which would change the color of your bookmark, thus providing a live emotional commentary on your reading material. It was a perfect storm of pseudoscience and kitsch. One can only imagine the confusion of a reader engrossed in a horror novel, watching their bookmark turn a concerned black or a nervous amber. It was technology, however flimsy, attempting to interact with the ancient act of reading, and it was gloriously, hilariously misguided. This embrace of the handmade and the outright kitschy inevitably leads to a scholarly debate that is still relevant today, especially in our era of Etsy and artisanal everything. Historians still argue whether the DIY craft movement of the 60s and 70s represented an authentic return to pre-industrial values and a rejection of capitalist norms, or if it was merely a different, more homespun form of consumerism. Was the woman knotting a macrame bookmark engaging in a genuine act of anti-establishment creation, or was she just following the latest trend, buying patterns and materials from the very commercial systems she claimed to reject? Was the mood ring bookmark a silly fad, or was it a genuine, if flawed, attempt to merge technology with the humanities? The argument hinges on intent and authenticity. Was it a revolution, or was it just a new way to sell things? The bookmark, in all its knotted, feathered, and color-changing glory, sits at the center of this question, a tiny, tangled artifact of a generation that desperately wanted to make everything, including how they marked their page, mean something more. That sterile, digital hum grows louder, solidifying from a distant promise into an ever-present reality. The green glow of the CRT monitor sharpens into the cool, flat light of an LCD screen. The chaotic, hopeful energy of the early internet coalesces into something sleeker, more corporate, and undeniably convenient. You are holding it in your hands right now. The first generation of Amazon's Kindle, released in 2007. Its plastic shell is smooth and cool to the touch. Its weight a strange, alien presence compared to the fibrous heft of a paperback. This is the moment the digital bookmark, once a metaphor on a computer screen, becomes a literal function on a device designed to replace the book itself. And with this transition comes a low, simmering anxiety, a quiet cultural grief for the physical object that is suddenly, and perhaps permanently, sidelined. The placeholder is now a flawless, invisible algorithm, and its very perfection makes the reading experience feel somehow thinner. The mainstream historical fact of this era is the launch, an explosive popularity of the dedicated e-reader, with the Kindle as its undisputed champion. Its most touted feature, beyond the e-ink screen, was the seamless, automatic bookmark. You simply closed the device. When you opened it again, it would return you to the exact word where you left off. No more losing your place, no more scrambling for a scrap of paper. It was technological perfection solving a problem that was thousands of years old. This was more than a feature. It was a philosophical statement about the future of reading, clean, efficient, and devoid of physical clutter. The messy, personal history of bookmarks, the silk ribbons, the beaded crafts, the chocolate bars, the ration coupons was rendered obsolete by a microchip and a line of code. The object had been vaporized into pure function. But as with all technological leaps, human behavior creates its own quirky, often illogical, responses. The fringe tidbit here is the phenomenon of the phantom bookmark. Early adopters of the Kindle and other e-readers often reported a strange, muscle memory impulse. They would finish reading a chapter on their device, and their hand would unconsciously reach for nothing. They were reaching for a bookmark that wasn't there. their brains still wired to the physical ritual of selecting an object and placing it carefully between the pages. Some users, unsettled by this lack of ritual, began using physical objects anyway. They would place an actual, physical bookmark on top of their closed Kindle, a utterly useless but psychologically comforting act. It was a tiny, poignant rebellion against perfection, a way for the body to insist that a centuries-old habit meant something more than mere function. The most absurd iteration? Someone, somewhere, undoubtedly dog-eared the corner of their Kindle's silicone protective case. This widespread, low-grade anxiety about the loss of the physical reading ritual fuels a passionate and ongoing debate that extends far beyond bibliophiles. Historians and technologists still argue whether the digitization of reading, for all its convenience and accessibility, comes at a profound cognitive and emotional cost. Does the loss of physicality, the weight of the book, the texture of the paper, the personal choice of a bookmark diminish our engagement with the text? Is there a tangible link between memory and physical navigation? When you can search a digital text instantly, do you lose the mental map you build by physically thumbing through pages, remembering that a crucial passage was near the top on the right after that beaded bookmark Aunt Mabel made? The automatic bookmark removes the need to remember, and in doing so, it may alter the very way we form memories of what we read. It's a debate about the soul of reading itself, and the humble, now unnecessary physical bookmark has become the symbolic standard for everything that might be lost in the name of seamless progress. That cool, flat light from the e-reader screen seems to wash over everything for a moment, a monochrome wave of pure efficiency. But then, a countercurrent begins to form, a splash of color, a texture, a scent that isn't ozone, but linseed oil, or the earthy smell of handmade paper. The very convenience of the digital world, its seamless, frictionless perfection, begins to breed its own opposite, a deep, visceral craving for the tactile, the unique, the authentically imperfect. You are living through the great irony of the 21st century. The more digital our lives become, the more we value the physical object, and the humble bookmark, that supposed relic, is experiencing a stunning, artisanal rebirth. It is no longer a necessity, it is a choice, a conscious, almost rebellious embrace of analog slowness. In a digital world, you are witnessing the craft revival, where the placeholder becomes a statement. The mainstream historical fact of this era is the rise of e-commerce platforms like Etsy, which provided a global marketplace for individual artisans and crafters. Suddenly, a person making beautiful, handmade bookmarks in their garage in Oregon could sell them to a reader in Oslo. This wasn't the mass production of the Industrial Revolution or the kitschy trends of the 70s. This was a return to the Victorian ideal of the handmade gift, but on a global, digitally facilitated scale. Social media platforms, particularly Instagram and Pinterest, became digital galleries for this new old art form. You could now follow your favorite bookmark maker, watch videos of them letterpressing a design onto cotton paper, or weaving a complex pattern on a tiny loom. The bookmark became a shareable, desirable object of design, its beauty documented and disseminated through the very technology it was pushing back against. It was a delicious paradox. The internet, which killed the need for the physical bookmark, became the engine of its revival. But as with any craft movement, the desire for uniqueness pushes boundaries into wonderfully strange territory. The quirky tidbit for our modern era has to be the rise of unconventional materials. We've moved beyond beads and silk. Artisans, striving for ultimate uniqueness, are now crafting bookmarks from things you would never imagine. There are bookmarks made of thinly sliced and polished agate or jaspereal stone, cool and heavy in your hand. You can find bookmarks laser cut from titanium or brass. There are bookmarks made of reclaimed wood from historic buildings, or vinyl cut from old, discarded records. The most bizarre and yet somehow fitting are the bookmarks made from deconstructed books, themselves the pages of a damaged old novel folded and sealed into a durable media placeholder. A bookmark made from a book used to mark another book. It's a level of artisan hipsterdom that is both absurd and deeply fascinating, a testament to the endless human drive to reinvent and personalize. This passionate, often expensive, return to the handmade inevitably sparks a debate that is very much of our time. Historians and cultural critics still argue whether this modern artisanal movement is an authentic cultural shift towards mindfulness and sustainability, or merely a form of nostalgic consumerism for the wealthy. Is the person who buys a $20 brass bookmark from an Etsy crafter engaging in a meaningful rejection of disposable culture, or are they just purchasing a luxury good for a seemingly obsolete function? Is it a genuine connection to craft, or is it craft washing? using the aesthetic of handmadeness to sell products in a digital marketplace. The debate hinges on intent and access. Is this a new folk art for the digital age? Or is it just another way to curate an aesthetically pleasing, analog-themed life for social media? The answer is as complex as the world we live in, a world where a simple placeholder can be both a deeply personal talisman and a highly curated status object. The bookmark, in all its artisanal glory, has become a tiny Rorschach test for our modern anxieties about authenticity, consumption, and what we truly value when we choose to disconnect. The cool, smooth weight of that artisanal agate bookmark rests in your palm, a tiny, solid paradox of old-world craft sold to a new-world digital storefront. But its significance runs deeper than its beauty or its price tag. That desire to hold something real, to place a physical object in the pages of a book, speaks to something fundamental within us, something that transcends mere utility or aesthetic preference. It's time to slip beneath the surface of paper and ink, past the history of silk and plastic, and into the quiet, humming landscape of the mind itself. Why does this simple act, this ritual of placing a marker, feel so inherently satisfying? You are about to explore the bookmark not as a historical artifact, but as a psychological anchor, a tiny crutch for the magnificent, yet flawed, machinery of human memory. The mainstream historical, or rather, scientific fact here comes from the field of cognitive neuroscience, specifically the study of spatial memory and navigation. Our brains have an incredible, innate ability to create cognitive maps of physical spaces. This is why you can remember that a specific quote was on the right-hand page, about 2/3 of the way down, near that coffee stain. You're not just remembering the words, you're remembering their physical location. This skill is governed by a network of brain structures, including the hippocampus, often called the brain's GPS. When you use a physical bookmark, you are essentially outsourcing one part of this memory task. You're letting an external object hold the location data for you, freeing up your cognitive resources to focus on absorbing the narrative or the information. The bookmark acts as a cognitive scaffold, a tiny piece of external hardware that interfaces perfectly with your brain's internal wetware. It's a partnership between mind and object that is thousands of years old. But the human mind is a weird and wonderful place, and its relationship with objects is rarely purely logical. The quirky, fringe tidbit in this psychological exploration is the concept of the lucky bookmark, or the ritualistic attachment to a specific placeholder. This isn't about the object's function, it's about its perceived magical properties. A person might have a particular bookmark, a tattered ticket stub from a first date, a pressed flower from a grandmother, a garden that they believe helps them understand or enjoy a book more. They'll use it for every single read, transferring it from one book to the next like a literary talisman. Psychologists might call this superstition or magical thinking, a form of conditioned response where the object itself triggers a certain mindset, conducive to reading and focus. The bookmark becomes a trigger for a state of mind. It's a placebo effect for reading comprehension, the belief that this specific object makes you a better, more engaged reader can, through the power of suggestion, actually make it true. The magic isn't in the bookmark, it's in the meaning the reader has poured into it. This deep, almost irrational connection we form with these simple objects leads us straight into a modern debate that bridges psychology, philosophy, and design theory. Historians and cognitive scientists still argue whether the physicality of a bookmark, its texture, weight, and visual distinctiveness plays a crucial role in creating stronger memory associations with the text itself, an effect that is completely lost with a digital placeholder. Does the tactile sensation of smoothing a silk ribbon between your fingers, or the visual cue of a bright red cardstock tab sticking out of a book, create a richer, more durable neural imprint than the flawless, invisible automation of an e-reader? Is there a measurable difference in recall or emotional connection to a passage when its place is held by a unique object you chose, rather than a uniform function executed by a machine? The argument suggests that the very imperfection and personality of a physical bookmark might be a feature, not a bug, in how our brains best form lasting memories. The friction of the ritual, the minor effort of selection and placement, might be the very thing that makes the reading experience stick. So, that beautiful agate slab or that tattered ticket stub is more than a tool. It is a key that unlocks a specific mode of thought. It is a promise you make to yourself to return. It is a tiny ceremony that signals to your brain, what happens here is important. Remember this place. In a world of endless digital distraction, this small act of intentional pause, of placing a physical anchor in a sea of words, becomes a radical act of mindfulness. It is a way of claiming a moment, of saying that this story, this knowledge, is worth not just reading, but worth remembering where you left it. The psychological comfort of that personal bookmark, that trusted talisman in your hand, feels solid and real. But now, let that feeling stretch, not backwards through time, but forwards far, far forwards. Push past the concerns of digital versus analog, beyond the artisanal present, into a deep and almost unimaginable future. Let's play a game of speculative archaeology. Let's imagine a time when the book as you know it is not just obsolete, but forgotten. Its form as mysterious to future humans as a clay tablet is to many today. And in this distant era, let's imagine what might remain of our quiet, humble tradition. What fragment of our reading lives might endure as a fossil. You are now an observer at the far end of history, watching as the story of the bookmark reaches its final, silent chapter. The mainstream historical fact that allows this speculation is the field of material culture studies itself, the understanding that future archaeologists will piece together our daily lives from the most mundane and durable objects we leave behind. They will find the skeletons of our cities, the shells of our devices, the mountains of our plastic waste. But among this grand detritus, they will also find smaller, more intimate things, a ceramic mug, a pair of spectacles, and perhaps, sealed in a Ziploc bag in a time capsule, or preserved in the anaerobic depths of a landfill, a bookmark, not a digital one. Of course those bits and bytes will have long since dissolved into entropy, but a physical one, a rigid plastic bookmark from the 1950s, perhaps, its bright colors barely faded, or a laminated promotional bookmark from a 1990s bookstore. These objects, through sheer durability and luck, become the Rosetta Stones for a forgotten ritual. And here is where our quirky, fringe tidbit emerges from the future dust. Imagine a team of alien archaeologists or humans so radically evolved they might as well be alien, excavating a 21st century landfill stratum. They uncover a well-preserved, artisanal bookmark made of titanium, laser-etched with a cryptic, poetic quote, "Not all those who wander are lost." Without the cultural context of Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, how would they interpret it? Would they assume it was a religious talisman, a piece of ceremonial wear, a measuring device, the concept of a placeholder for a nonlinear, static information storage unit? A book might be utterly alien to a culture that interfaces with information directly through neural nets, or stores it in crystalline energy matrices. They might catalog it as a ritual slip or a decorative data key, completely misunderstanding its humble purpose. The irony is delicious. The most advanced, durable bookmark we can make today might become the most misunderstood artifact of tomorrow. This thought experiment leads us to the final, overarching scholarly debate, one that puts our entire journey into perspective. Historians and philosophers of technology still argue whether the ultimate legacy of humanity will be found in our grand monuments and digital clouds or in our smallest, most personal artifacts, the things we held, loved, and used every day. Will the future understand us better from the ruins of a data center or from a single, well-preserved bookmark tucked inside a rusted e-reader? The bookmark, in this light, becomes a powerful symbol for the intimate, the analog, the quietly human. It represents a specific kind of patience, a linear progression through a narrative, a personal choice made again and again. A digital bookmark in the cloud is a ghost. A physical bookmark is a fossil, and fossils tell stories that ghosts cannot. So, as you finish this last chapter, perhaps your own bookmark rests in the pages of a physical book on your nightstand, or perhaps you've been listening, your place held automatically by an algorithm. Either way, you've become part of this long, quiet history. You are a link in a chain that stretches from a monk-esque scrap of parchment to a far future archaeologist as puzzled speculation. The object itself is insignificant, a slip of paper, a strip of silk, a line of code. But the human impulse behind it is profound. It is the desire to pause, to absorb, and to return. It is a statement of intent. It is a promise to a story. I am not done with you yet. It is, in the end, a small, defiant act of optimism in the face of time's relentless march. A belief that there will be a future moment of quiet, and that you will be there, ready to open the book again. The journey is complete now. The long, gentle arc of the humble bookmark, from its birth in the silent scriptorium to its potential rest in a future dig site, has been traced. You've traveled through centuries, not with the clamor of empires, but with the quiet turning of pages. The lights in your room are surely low now, the world outside a distant, softened murmur. There's no need to hold on to the threads of history anymore. You can let them go. Let them drift away like feathers on a still pond. The debates of scholars, the quirks of collectors, the innovations of artisans, they can all recede into a pleasant, blurry background. What remains is the simple, comforting truth of the act itself, the feeling of a book in your hands, the decision to pause, the smooth gesture of sliding a marker between the pages, a gentle promise to yourself to return to this world of words. It is a ritual of peace, a tiny ceremony of calm in the chaos of living. So let the history you've absorbed tonight settle into your mind like a gentle sediment, not as facts to recall, but as a feeling to carry forward, a feeling of continuity, of connection to all the countless readers who came before, who also sought a moment of quiet and marked their place. Let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of this final paragraph, each word a soft step leading you toward rest. There is nothing more to do now. The story is over. The book can be closed. Your place is held. Sweet dreams.